Greetings, Corpse Clubbers, and welcome to another episode of Corpse Club, the official podcast for DailyDead.com. My name is Heather Wixson, and we are currently in the middle of Women in Horror Month. And for this week's episode, I have two extremely special guests. I would call them probably two of the best lady podcasters out there. We have Stephanie Crawford on here, as well as Emily von. And Emily, I always script your last name. It's von Seele, right?
Von Seele.
Von Seele, gosh darn it. Von Seele. Stephanie you're on Just the Discs from time to time, if I'm correct.
Yeah, fairly frequently.
Yes. And then Emily, you're on Dead Ringers.
Uh-huh.
Am I missing any?
Well, we've been so bad about recording with the Screamcast. I totally understand you forgetting about it, but that's officially the podcast I'm on.
Gotcha. Okay, gotcha. Yeah, I've listened to you and Bob on Just the Discs. Actually, I listened to a couple episodes on my way to Utah. It was a really good way to kind of catch up on stuff. And I did not get a chance to listen to the latest Dead Ringers, but I know that was one. Was that the one that Kat had suggested the double feature for, Emily?
Yeah, she had us do As Above, So Below and Blair Witch, the newest Blair Witch. And it was a really fun conversation.
Okay, cool. Because both of those movies are extremely, as the kids say, my jam. And I knew I wanted to check it out. And I was like, oh, man. And on the way home, I just kind of zoned out with music. So I apologize. But yes, I'm so thrilled to have you both back for Women in Horror Month. So thank you for joining me for this little chat.
I'm so happy to be here.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Wonderful. I'm going to do my best to not screw this up amongst the great ladies here tonight. It's been a little bit of a weird week for me, but I know we're going to be diving into Near Dark for tonight's episode. But I figured, we could kind of chat a little bit about some of the fun stuff we've been watching lately. Stephanie, what have you been up to in terms of things you've been catching up on?
Well, that's a great way to put it, because it's very much been me catching up on things. For instance, I only recently saw Brightburn.
Oh,
a couple days ago. And that's one where I heard mostly negative things, but it was pretty divisive, I would think. So I saw, and there's so much I admired about it, but ultimately it was so nihilistic that I feel like it obliterated any deeper message than this kid is powerful and evil. So it was this great concept, and I feel like they fumbled it. So I think those are the most disappointing kind of movies, actually, where you see all the potential in the world and then, yes, that is my film theory analysis.
I love it. Yeah, you never have to apologize for catching up, because I literally feel like that's what I do pretty much 52 weeks out of the year, is just constantly playing catch up. So, because I don't know how both of you feel, but it just feels like we get so much these days that it's impossible to completely stay up to date on everything that's out there, especially even in genre stuff. And I'm not even talking like mainstream stuff. It just feels like we get so much horror every single week that if you really tried to actually watch everything that came out every single week, you'd probably go insane.
Oh, yeah, especially when you start throwing series into the mix. Like, that's the thing I'm constantly catching up on. Like, I'm always slow to pick up on whatever everyone is geeking out about on TV. And I get there eventually, but it's an overabundance of riches, I guess.
Yeah, of all the problems you could have, it is one of the nicer ones.
Yeah, I'm constantly playing catch up on TV. I was... as a glutton for punishment, the only, other than What We Do in the Shadows, the only TV show that I really kept up on last year was American Horror Story, because they did the slasher season. And I was like, well, I'm not missing that. Especially set in the 80s. I was like, okay, so, Ryan Murphy was kind of reading my mind on that one. And it's goofy and it was weird and it went to some places I wasn't expecting, but I still had fun with it. I don't know that I'll watch the next season of American Horror Story. It all depends on what they're going to do. But yeah, there's so many different things I see people talking about, especially with Netflix series, that I feel like I'm like so behind on everybody. I've never even watched, and I hate to even admit this, I still have yet to watch any of Sabrina. And I know it'll be my shit, but like, I just haven't had the time.
The day you sit down to watch Sabrina, you are going to have a great time. I love that series. It's doing some fun stuff. The cast is great. It's one of my favorites.
Surprisingly gruesome, surprisingly fun. That's my favorite combination.
Yeah.
See, this is why you guys are on this, is because you guys could tell people about Sabrina, where I'm over here like a lame-o and I'm just like, I haven't watched it yet.
Everybody go watch Sabrina and it will make you happy.
Okay. Well, now I'm going to have to watch it. And how about you, Emily? What have you been up to on the viewing side of things?
I caught Gretel and Hansel last weekend, and I was super excited for it. I love Oz Perkins. I was really curious to see how he would tackle a fairy tale and what he would do with that world. And I was not in the least disappointed. I thought it was an amazing film. It got me in all the right places. It was intense. It was dark, but it was also really powerful and feminist, and it just freaking rocked my world.
The thing that boggles my mind is I saw several reviews were like, oh, he basically just stuck to the fairy tale and did nothing new. And I was like, did you see the whole movie?
Yeah.
Like, are you kidding me? Like, this is not Hansel and Gretel like that I knew as a kid. Like, this is something so different. And I love the fact that we now have two very different interpretations of these characters in two very different movies between Witch Hunters and this one. Like, if you would have told me, like, out of all the fairy tales, like the ones that you could kind of put a little clever twist on, I wouldn't have expected it to be Hansel and Gretel. But oh my God, I loved this movie so much. I was hoping it would do better. I mean, not that box office really is a determinant of what the quality of a movie is, but like, I wanted it to do better. But I think it's one of those movies that eventually when people do start to catch up on it, they're going to be like, oh man, like between that and Underwater, I think they're going to be like, oh, I think we missed out on some good stuff.
Yeah, I agree. I think those both are going to find their audiences later, and everyone will have a big party together when we're all celebrating the same things.
Yeah, I just thought it was really interesting too, and this isn't really spoilers, but I just think it would pair beautifully with The Witch in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Like, holy hell. But the visuals in that movie are phenomenal. And I think Waxwork just released the soundtrack, which I desperately want to get. But I love Osgood stuff. I don't know how you guys feel about The Pretty Things That Live in the House. I'm so on that one.
I love that one.
But Blackcoat's Daughter to me is like, oh my God. Like, it's just, speaking of Kieran Shipka, like,
another reason to see Sabrina.
Yes. Everything leads back to Sabrina.
Yes. Yeah, I love his stuff and I love his storytelling style. I think it's slow and it's kind of indeterminate sometimes, and it's not going to be for everybody. But for me, it just kind of hits all my sensories in the right way, and I'm totally just there for anything that he's doing.
Yeah, I'm hoping, because I still haven't shared it with my other half yet. So I'm hoping maybe on Friday, because we have like the AMC A-list thing. That's like our one thing that we do still. That's fun. But I want to try to do like a double feature of that with Birds of Prey, because I haven't seen that yet. I'm like the only journalist in LA that didn't get to see it for some reason. So, but that's fine. Girl power at the theater. That'll be fun.
Hells yeah.
I'm very excited about that. I've been a fan of Birds of Prey, the comic book series, for a long time. And even Harley Quinn. Like, I have old internet accounts where I could have just the regular name Harley Quinn. That's how old they are.
Have either one of you watched the Harley Quinn series?
No, not yet, but I've heard really great things.
Okay, I was curious about that as well, because I heard it pretty much leans into an R rating as well in terms of its tone and stuff like that. So I was curious if either one of you had seen it, because I'm behind. So I didn't even get to watch Watchmen. So, I'm just terrible, but I'd heard really good things about it. So I was curious if either one of you had any perspective on that. But yeah, I'm really excited for Birds of Prey. So yeah, I guess we can kind of hop into Near Dark. Speaking of female directors, of course, Near Dark was directed by the one and only Kathryn Bigelow, who is one of my personal heroes. Partially for Near Dark, mostly because of Point Break. I will always work in a Point Break reference when I can. I'm like, yeah, she's got an Oscar or whatever, but like Point Break.
Yeah, me too.
Hells yeah.
It's such an interesting project to me, especially when you, in comparison to where the genre was in 1987, where vampire films were at in 1987. Of course, she co-wrote this with Eric Red, who I think we just celebrated the release of Body Parts on Scream Factory, which he also wrote. He's been involved with a lot of really cool stuff. And I don't know. I know there's so much to appreciate about this movie. But I think top to bottom, I mean, between the cast, the score, the story, the approach, I mean, it might be my favorite vampire movie out of the 80s. It's pretty close. I mean, as much as I love Fright Night and I love Lost Boys, and I think my underdog vampire pick is always going to be Vamp.
I was gonna come in carrying a torch for Vamp.
Oh my God, yes. Oh, see, this is why you're on here. But I think Near Dark to me just really does something interesting with it. And of course, obviously, it's, basically because we're mashing up vampires and Westerns, which when you're in sort of the glitz and glam of the 80s, horror movies that were happening at the time, it's such a refreshing approach in comparison to what everything else that was kind of happening at that time.
Yeah. And I think one of the strengths it draws from that is the fact that vampires and Westerns are not obvious at all. Like, that's not a mashup that you would immediately think of and imagine working as well as it does, but it really, really, really does. She pulls it off.
Right. And that's because of something so simple, which is the presence of the sun. And the way they work around that, I think, is mwah.
Yeah, I definitely think one of the film's strengths is the fact that it is so stripped down, and it really does sort of throw a lot of those vampire conventions to the side. Like, we're not worried about holy water, we're not worried about crosses, or things like that. It's essentially, man versus time, or in Unhuman Man or whatever. But it's, it's just the element of the sun is really the biggest threat for them. They're not worried about guns or anything like that. They're not even worried about like people hunting them down. It's just this one element that regardless of whatever they do, they can't outrun it. They can hide from it, but it will always be there. And I think that's really reflective of sort of the very naturalistic approach to the story. And I just think it's so compelling in that way. And it really also, on a visual level, adds a lot to the movie in ways that we just hadn't seen in like other vampire movies. And I hate just like, comparing it to other vampire movies, but I just think that there's something really interesting about how down and dirty it feels comparatively to something that's sort of glitzy and glam like Lost Boys or sort of old classic-y horror Fright Night, or Vamp, which I love, but it's very neon soaked, very dirty LA kind of feeling. It feels like its own thing. And I think that's for me, like, I remember renting it as a kid and it just was like, what is this movie? And I don't think I even understood how great it was as a kid. I think it took me probably to like my 20s when I sat down and watched it again. And I was like, my God, this movie is profoundly like smart about so many different things, especially when they didn't have a huge budget. Like, they had no budget basically. And to do the things that they did through story and not being able to rely on a lot of like, big effects and things like that was just a really great way to make a vampire movie with no money.
Yeah.
Well, I think Kathryn Bigelow teaming up with Eric Red is brilliant, because of course he did The Hitcher, which is one of my favorites. And much like Near Dark, it's an on-the-road genre movie that, even though it's in the middle of the day, it's terrifying and you don't feel safe. It doesn't matter that it's not in the middle of the night necessarily. And I kind of couldn't help myself from comparing the films a lot. And like you mentioned, with the aesthetics of the other vampire movies that have like a wet asphalt kind of look, this has like the dust and the blood, and it's so distinctive. And our protagonist, Caleb, he kind of gave me a C. Thomas Howell vibe a little bit, which also made me think of The Hitcher. I don't know if either of you picked up on that. I'm like, you know what? I feel like they went to C. Thomas Howell first and he was busy.
Can I make a confession?
Yeah, totally.
Between us girls, I've not seen The Hitcher yet.
What?
I know.
No shame, but it's not overstated its reputation at all. It's
Really?
so great.
Holy shit, that movie scared the crap out of me as a kid. Like I seriously for years would check my French fries before I would eat them. And there's a reason for that. And once you see it, you'll understand. But holy crap, like that movie, like I saw that before I saw Lady Hawk. And I like when I saw Lady Hawk, I couldn't trust Rutger Hauer because I was like, no, this guy is evil. Oh my gosh. We should stop the episode right now and go watch The Hitcher.
Yeah, I
pause.
still have my DVD. I'll come right over.
Okay. Awesome.
Yes, I love it. Yes. No, The Hitcher is fantastic. It really did. You know, it's interesting because like as a kid, like I always watched a shit ton of horror, but like the ones that scared me were movies like The Hitcher, the things that like could happen. And there's such a plot, like a plausibility to that movie that is just absolutely terrifying. And it made me really like, why would anybody ever pick up a hitchhiker? Like, I don't understand.
I say that when I see any movie at all.
Well, and
like,
this one,
what the fuck, people?
It's so they can eat them. So that makes sense, at least.
Yeah.
And you're Neil. Come on in.
Like, who goes and rents a cabin in the woods anymore? Nobody, because they know better. Like, you've seen horror movies.
Only bad things will happen to you there.
Yeah, nobody's going to go be a counselor at summer camp. Come on, we know better at this point.
The whole industry is failing. Thanks for.
Yet another thing millennials are destroying.
Go eat your avocado toast. Which I've never had avocado toast, but I'm actually sure it's probably pretty good.
At the Draft House?
Oh, do they? Okay, I'll do that.
Oh my God, we're totally having
We're
an
doing
avocado
it. We're
toast
actually
in September.
Let me tell you where the great avocado toast is.
I'm so old that like when they made that into a joke, I was like, people put avocados on toast? Oh, okay. Like I just didn't even know that was a thing. I'm, in California, like we just throw in guacamole or put it on a burger or something. Like,
right. The secret is avocados can go on anything.
I've learned that now. So
now the older I get, the more things I put avocado on.
Well, you mentioned Adrian Pasdar, which is really interesting to me because he wasn't an actor that I was like super familiar with as a kid. I think I remembered him from Solar Babies of all movies. And then eventually I put it two and two together that, oh yeah, he was also in Top Gun but it was, very minor part. But I was like, cause he just has that distinguished like little scar on his chin. So I would just kind of follow the scar. But I remember getting really, really excited when he was on Heroes, which I don't know if either one of you ever watched that show.
No, I didn't watch Heroes.
Yeah, the silence answered you on that one.
I guess it did. Yeah, I watched the first season. Don't even worry about it. But
we all need to break, catch up on all these things, and we'll come back.
Yes, we're so well prepared for our episode. But no, he was on. I watched the first season. Second season, I watched the first episode, and I was like, I'm out. But I was really, because like when they announced Heroes and he shows up and I was like, oh my God, it's the guy from Near Dark. And I got really excited because I love when like, because he was sort of like an actor that was doing like minor, I don't want to say minor because that sounds like I'm diminishing the things that he was doing, but he wasn't doing big, huge projects through the 90s and things like that. I think he was, other than like Carlito's Way, I don't even really know what he was doing in the 90s. If I could be honest, sorry, Adrian Pasdar. But I think as Caleb, he's really good in this because he's got sort of that boyish charm to him, that aw shucks-ism to himself a little bit, which we see, when he rolls into town and he's playing around with the boys a little bit, and then he sees May and he's like, I'm going to eat some ice cream with you, which is a really, I don't know how either one of you feel, but that's a very presumptuous pickup line is like, can I have a taste of your cone? Like, I wouldn't let some strange guy lick my ice cream cone.
Right.
Maybe Adrian Pasdar.
Yeah. That's a given now. But I think you're right. There are several moments in the film, that one and the one where he stops the car and won't keep moving until she kisses him, where in the hands of a lesser actor, both of those are going to come off as creepy, but he manages to make it still endearing. And we're still on Caleb's side.
Yeah, it's impressive because that ice cream scene is like, oh, he's a predator and she's going to rip his throat out. And it's going to be so satisfying. But it's nice. Like, hey, look at this horse. Look at me. I know how to lasso. And the stop truck thing was like, come on, guy. But no, he's genuinely a very sweet, naive kid. So when we see the horror and pain he suffers, it's that much more effective.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. And I think it's interesting too because I think as a kid, I never quite got the romance between Caleb and May. It always felt like kind of rushed to me. But as I got older and you have a little perspective on romance and crap like that, I'm such a softie. It doesn't bother me as much as anymore because I realize like that they're both just sort of caught up in that instantaneous rush. And I mean, obviously May being who she is, it almost makes sense that it would be that quick for her because she's very instinctual with, with her being a vampire and things like that. And I, again, it was one of those like, when I was a kid, I was like, oh, who the hell is like, okay, I'm going to make you a vampire. Now we're just going to go live with my ragtag family in a camper. And like within the span of 24 hours. But as an adult now, I'm like, okay, I get it. Like, get kind of caught up on those feelings. But I think a lot of that also works really well because of Jenny Wright. And her performance in the movie, because we talk a lot about manic pixie dream girls these days. And I wouldn't call her character necessarily that, but I would almost say she's the prototype for what that character would evolve into.
Yeah, and she also looks like a beautiful elf, which I think helps or doesn't help, whichever way you look at it.
I love that you called her a beautiful elf. Like, oh.
It's just these delicate features.
Right. And she's got kind of this perpetual dream-like look on her face. And like, she doesn't come across like as alien, but she comes across as a little bit other.
Well, it's like what Caleb said. She was talking about the stars and how she'd still be alive when they fell. And he's like, stoner.
She's like a hippie child or something. Almost like Star in Lost Boys in a way.
Yeah.
Interesting how there's almost like some parallels between the two. Although we never see Caleb and May have sex. But yet sex sort of consummates in Lost Boys, which I think is an interesting distinction between the two. Because I think what's interesting about Caleb and May here is that their connection really is blood. And it's not necessarily physical. I mean, obviously they're attracted to each other. And there's, a sense of devotion very quickly between them. But yet ultimately they'd never consummate that relationship at all in the movie, which is a very sort of interesting choice, I think.
Yeah. And I think kind of adding to that, I don't know about you guys, but I've always found the scenes where he's drinking from her wrist to be pretty sexually charged.
Yeah.
Like there's the way they play it, like there's kind of like this yearning and there's needing in it aside from just he needs blood and food. There's a lot of kind of sexual energy and tension that's wrapped up in those moments. So it doesn't get explicit, but you kind of feel it nonetheless.
Completely, yeah. And there's like this desperate yearning to it, but it is very sexy with them against the truck and that's him suffering, slowly turning into a vampire, and he needs blood to live. When she originally bites him, I don't know about you two, but that kiss leading up to it was incredibly hot.
Yeah, no,
yes.
Absolutely. Yes. And I love the fact that because it's sort of for everything that sort of follows with, Lance Henriksen and Bill Paxton's characters, it sort of breaks down Caleb's masculinity, I think, in a way, because every time he feeds from her, he's on his knees to her. Yeah. He's almost like in worship of her, which I think is a really interesting sort of visual note that tells us everything we need to know about who Caleb is without sort of, bashing us over the head about it.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah, and he's a farm boy, and there's never a scene where he's like, well, a woman's not going to tell me what to do. Nothing like that is ever shoehorned in, thank God. He really is a very vulnerable character. And yeah, both Caleb and May are just so sweet and so pure in so many ways. And then when you look at let's say, Lance Henriksen and Jenette Goldstein's kind of Bonnie and Clyde, but as vampires. And Bill Paxton's like manic energy. They're both on these extreme sides where if not done correctly, it wouldn't have worked. Like the young couple would have been too cheesy. The really scary vampires would have been too cartoonish. But I think they pull it off so well. The script just cares about all of them. It takes the time. And I love how all the romantic relationships are handled as well. Especially compared to the brand new burgeoning one with the who knows how long they've exactly been together.
Yeah, and I love, I found myself thinking that over the years, and people are going to be easy to chalk this up to Twilight, but I think it happened before that. We started seeing vampires as kind of these stories of loneliness. Like we saw it in Bram Stoker's Dracula, we saw it in Buffy and Angel. Like this wasn't new to Twilight, these like sad, contemplating everything emo vampires. But here we see Jesse and Diamondback in this relationship together where they're traveling the world, they're living forever, they're not afraid of anything except for the sun, and they're just having the time of their lives. Like, this isn't a sad relationship where someone's yearning for something that's lost. These are two people who are enjoying the time that they have together because it's all right in front of them, and they're very much living in this moment. And I like the energy that brings.
Absolutely. The scene when they get carjacked is probably, it's up there as one of my top 5 favorite moments, because these guys are just like coming in with their, dick swinging, and they're like, oh, we're going to carjack these guys. And it's like, oh, you dumb SOBs. Like, do you know what you've just done?
And they're so calm. So cool.
Yeah.
I was going to say, I'd actually read a story how Lance Henriksen, or maybe he said this, he might have talked about this because he's been at Flashback Weekend in Chicago a few times. And I can't remember if he said it there during a panel or if this was like an interview I read. But I guess when he was getting ready to come out for Near Dark, he actually drove cross country dressed already as Jesse. So He was all like scruffy. He had the rat's tail already working for him. And I guess he like grew his nails out really long and gnarly and everything. Wow. And he was apparently picking up hitchhikers on his way across country.
Oh my God.
And I'm like, I think that kind of makes Lance Henriksen even cooler now.
Yeah.
Because he was just so in it. But I love that about him because he really, and it's funny because, like, a year earlier, we just saw Lance Henriksen as like an android, basically, very removed, cold from feelings and things like that. Or, he ends up being heroic in the end. And it's just such a complete 180. And I think that's like the great thing about Lance Henriksen is that anything that I've seen him do, I kind of buy him as being that character. Like, I never question, like, well, it's Lance Henriksen. Like, I don't see him. And I don't know. There's like not a lot of actors where he sort of just really immerses himself in characters like that. Like, he's a very special breed because I fully believe him as Bishop. I fully believe him as Jesse. I fully believe him, is pretty much anything that he does. But ultimately, he's Lance. And I think that's just kind of badass. But I don't know that I would have taken a ride with him in 1986.
Right, that's my question. He started picking up hitchhikers, but after they saw him, did they actually get in his car? Or did they say, you know what, man, I'm good?
Right?
Those are some brave hitchhikers if they actually got in. Or movie buffs.
That's true. If Lance Henriksen himself gave me a ride, I'd be like, yeah, let's do it.
Especially on the heels of Aliens, where you're like, you're like just some casual 20-something like trying to hitch a ride towards California, and like, oh my God, here's the guy who's just in one of the biggest movies of the entire year, just wants to pick you up. Like, I guess I go with him, right? Like, what could go wrong?
I'm assuming you're doing something for a role, but if not, my murder is going to make the front page.
Yeah, no, I just always thought that was really fascinating. And I don't think, in terms of big performances, I'm glad you guys mentioned Jenette in this movie, because it actually took me years to realize that was Vasquez from Aliens. I don't know why it never quite clicked because again, she's so transformative between the two, where I'm just like, wait, what? I don't even think it was until after I saw Terminator 2 when I realized and I put it all together, where I was like, wait, what? And she's so good in it. And it's again, you have a film filled with really big performances between Lance and especially Bill Paxton, and I think even Joshua Miller to a certain degree, that it's easy to lose her at times, but yet she's so compelling anytime the camera focuses on her. And there's just something really freaking cool about her, and just the way that she sort of carries herself. Again, in sort of this very dirty, grimy, sort of masculine-y kind of world that they're living in. She really holds her own in this, and I don't think she quite gets enough kudos for how integral Diamondback actually is to the story.
Yeah, she's amazing in the role. Like we have this movie with all of these amazing, amazing character actors, and each one is doing something unique and filling out the members of this crazy family and making them everything that they are.
I know, and we haven't even. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. She's one of those characters where she's kind of biding her time. She's giving off a cool vibe, but you're not quite sure what she's about yet, and you're kind of watching her, and you're like, when she does something, it's going to be the coolest thing.
Yeah.
And we haven't even talked about really Bill Paxton yet.
Oh,
Severin.
Oh my God. Like, I mean, in a goofy kind of way, like he's ridiculously hot in this movie. I don't even know how to explain it. Like, I love when he like goes and like takes a ride with the ladies. Cause obviously those ladies aren't long for this world at that point. But like, if I was again driving around and saw him sort of standing on the side of the road with his hair slicked back and his like, I think it's the one time that like he takes a shower in the entire movie.
And I think he put on his very nice rodeo shirt. He wasn't just wearing like his tank top and shirt over it. Like he's dressed up.
Yeah, he's ready for a night out on the town. And I'm like, I probably would have picked him up. I won't lie. I mean, it would have been worth it. But in terms of big Bill Paxton performances that we've gotten over the years, I do think Severin's my favorite. I mean, Game Over Man is pretty cool. But there's just something really visceral and animalistic about his performance in Severin, and it's so damn good.
Yeah. And I feel like you talked about how he has the manic energy, and I feel like that's right on the nose. And I think it felt like Bigelow just kind of stood back and said, okay, go with it. And trusted him to find the right space between freaking insane, but not over the top.
Yeah, he just feels like he's pure chaos, just stuffed into a vampire's body.
Yeah, you literally do not know what's coming next. And I think that's probably why when you talk about sort of great moments in Near Dark, obviously the bar scene is probably the best.
Yes.
And I think again that's one of the strongest suits for Near Dark or strongest aspects to Near Dark is because you just don't know what's going to come next with these people, because like again, and I don't mean to say this like against Fright Night or anything, but like Jerry Dandridge is there. Jerry Dandridge is going to feed. That's it's A to B, A to B, A to B, and then we have to fight them and defeat them. With these guys, you don't know what they're going to do next, and I think that sort of that anticipation that you have whenever they come into a room, they interact with somebody, is what makes the movie so effective. And that bar scene for me is probably one of the best set pieces out of 80s horror, because it's like either in the bar, they're being a little snappy with people. You've got Lance Henriksen ordering drinks, but he only wants to keep the glass, which is never a good sign. And then just like this like slow roll of hell is unleashed. Like it doesn't just happen like in a minute. Like it just continuously kind of keeps unfolding. And I think like for me, like that scene for me is what really sets Near Dark apart, because there's so much tension and so much like anticipation. You don't know what they're going to do next to these poor people. And of course, I would be remiss if I didn't mention the fact that we have baby James LeGros in there as the little cowboy who gets away. Would eventually go on to work on a little movie called Point Break with Kathryn Bigelow just a few years later.
He lived to tell their story.
It all lines up. It was perfect. Right place, right time. That scene is it's so magical and so scary because, you think of it like it's tense for everybody, but then you start thinking about it from the perspective of all of the locals who are in that bar. And like just kind of one by one, they see all of their friends slowly being taken apart. And okay, I haven't been killed yet, but am I next? Might be.
Yeah, and that's a great point because it's clearly a small town. So all these people have probably known each other all their lives. And suddenly it'd be horrifying any circumstance, but these people probably there are probably like a few truckers or something in there, but they probably mostly watched each other grow up.
Yeah.
And it's actually a really mean scene, but I think it's completely necessary. So we know they're not just a bunch of like, oh, we look cool, we're vampires on the road, but we need to see exactly how bloodthirsty and dangerous and reckless and just looking at people like they're meat to go. We need to see that. And I agree with you both, man. That bar scene delivers.
Well, it's interesting because you mentioned that, and I think Homer as a character is a really he's interesting in a very different way than say Jesse or Diamondback or Severin, in the fact that, obviously he comes in the packaging of a child, which is sort of a thing that it's almost like an unthinkable thing, because you don't want to think of a child being evil like that. Mm-hmm. And throughout a lot of the scenes, like he's not really as proactive as the other people. Like in the bar scene, I love that he just sort of sits back and he's like kind of jamming out to himself and just kind of watching everything happen. Like he doesn't really react very, very much in that scene. And then he finds, Sarah, who, is Caleb's sister. And you almost get a sense that because he threatens to eat her or to bite her, eat her. He's not a cannibal. He threatens to bite her. But I don't feel like when he first befriends her that's necessarily what he was thinking. And it's interesting to me because he's such a different note of a character versus the rest of that like sort of ragtag band of outlaws. And I think Homer kind of gets lost in the mix a little bit, but I do think the scene where he basically bursts into flames, as much as the optical effects are, they're a little dated, it's still really a really shocking moment. And I just think he's a very interesting character study versus everybody else.
Yeah, and I do like that we have a boy version here and the girl version with Interview with the Vampire. And we can see how the dynamics are different. But I always read that scene where he brings Sarah in as he found someone who he could put in the exact same situation he's in, like make her body a child and then wait for her to like basically be friends with her, be like a big brother to her and wait for her to mentally age. And then he'd basically have a partner, and which is sad and sick and weird, but that's always the vibe I got from it.
Me too, because he's a member of this family. They all love and take care of each other, but he is in a situation that no one else can understand.
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately he would have turned her and wanted to, because obviously he goes to the farm and basically takes her. But it's interesting because he doesn't bite her immediately. Like he just wants to watch TV with her, which I think is kind of cute in a way.
Yeah.
Where he's like, hey, let's go watch TV, because he knows by bringing her there that she could be in danger. It's so interesting to me because I think you're very valid in what you're saying. But I always thought it was interesting that he didn't just bite her, because he could have. And I think there's something a little bit more. But maybe again, that's also sort of reflective of like what he sees what May did with Caleb. And, he's like, oh, well, maybe I need a friend too. And maybe I'll just take this little girl who happens to be the sister of this guy. But yeah, I would have liked to see him get together with Claudia from Interview the Vampire. They could have gotten to a lot of childlike vampire shenanigans.
That would be the greatest sitcom ever.
Yeah, but it's great that we can read so much into his character, because I kind of think you're completely right too, and that maybe he looked at her and he also thought, oh, I know what happened to me when I was a kid. Why should that happen to you? Like, you're just out here completely. You're in a nightgown. Come on, man. Do you know what's happening?
Yeah, she was ripe for the picking. I mean, what kid is out buying Coke at like 5 a.m. without her dad realizing she's left the hotel room? What a terrible dad, by the way.
This is
all
bad
the vampires
parenting.
point that out. They're like, what are you doing out right now?
This all comes down to Loy Colton being the worst father ever, watching his oldest child getting kidnapped right in front of him. His daughter is basically just gallivanting out around weird hotels at 5 o'clock in the morning. Like, he needs to control his children.
But I can't be mad at Doll Man or Jack Death. I can't do it. I love it too much.
It's funny because honestly, like, it was one of those things. It took me quite a few years to realize who Tim Thomerson was. I think it was maybe like 10 years ago, I finally watched Trancers, and I was like, wait, this is the guy from Near Dark. So it didn't even dawn on me like his legacy. I just thought he was like, he was just a dad character. So I think it's really, again, it's when you look at this cast, like, there is some really interesting things going on that you just, again, when you were looking at like casts from the 80s, there's some really interesting things going on in Near Dark. And it's also where I should have mentioned that I've never actually seen Fade to Black.
I don't think I have either.
Fade to Black. Which one? I think there's a few.
The 1981, where he's like the horror fan.
Yeah, that's a great one. And I think Mickey Rourke has a cameo or a pre-fame little scene in it. He's like a bully.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. It's one of those I'm like, I know I should catch up on. Speaking of catching up, and I just have never had a chance to do it. But, I mean, Tim Thomerson has given us a lot of fun things. What I did know him from, though, was Hunter, the TV show from the 80s with Stephanie Kramer and, Fred Dreyer. Because he was like a detective on that show, like in and out for a few years. So when it comes to like procedural 80s TV shows, I knew people from those.
I know him from being like shrunk down and things. That's a little different. But, I've really liked how much more often I've been seeing Tom Atkins lately, like on social media and just engaging with fans. I know he always did, but I just, I've been noticing him popping up places more. And I would like that to happen with Tim. Like, maybe together they can go on tour together or something. I feel like they have like a similar energy there.
Oh, we should get them like a buddy movie.
Tim and Tom.
I mean, they're talking about like doing another Night of the Creeps movie. Like, could we do a weird spinoff of that with like Tim Thomerson and Tom Atkins and find a way to resurrect Tom Atkins again? I mean, we didn't see him die, but we just assumed he died. We didn't see Tom Atkins die.
Okay, so we're making this, and we're making a new Scream movie starring Kirby, because we didn't see her die either. We have to get on all of these projects, ladies.
We are going to be so busy this year.
We are.
The podcast. I'm really proud of us. But not to change the subject, but I have kind of a quick question for you both. It's serious, but it's quick.
Yeah. Do
you think a DIY total blood transfusion would actually work when it comes to curing vampirism?
I don't know, because wasn't that something that was in like the original Dracula book, if I'm not mistaken? I in terms of the realistic medical approach to it, it actually makes sense to me, because like, oh yeah, like that actually, and I'm like, if I'm being like real, like I'm thinking about this in realistic terms, it's like, oh yeah, that's probably a good way to cure it, because if you get rid of all the vampire blood and you infuse it with human blood, but that also would require his dad to have a ridiculous amount of blood.
Yeah,
to put into
so
his
much
body.
blood.
Yeah, lots of blood, very clean environment, but they're on a farm.
Yeah, there's a lot of
it
dust
in the barn.
It's really,
This is not a very hygienic procedure right now, with the horse just being kind of 4 feet away.
Yeah, doing horse poops and stuff.
Yeah,
definitely.
there's so much poop around.
And
I don't know.
also-
I think there's like a scientific logic to it, even though it's not super sciencey, but there is logic there. But at the same time, so much of what I love about the concept of vampirism and vampire stories is that there is an indisputable element of magic to them. And blood transfusions and magic don't necessarily, walk hand in hand.
Well,
Yeah,
and also, I was going to say also for May too, because like it makes sense with like the dad being able to transfuse to Caleb because their family, they probably share blood type. But like, who's transfusing to May? Like,
Do you think they gave her horse blood?
Oh my God! What if they did?
Oh, May's out grazing again. It's just her way nowadays. Don't worry about it.
That was in the Near Dark sequel that never happened.
Maybe that's for the best.
But yeah, I always wondered about that because like if we're gonna base this in reality, like, obviously, the dad doing it for Caleb makes sense, but like May, like where did they get her blood? Like he's a veterinarian. It's not like he can go to a blood bank at a regular hospital and just like, type her out and get her like blood type, bags of her blood type. Like it just, I'm willing to give it a leap because it gives them a happy ending. But I have always wondered about that.
Well, I think they should have gone half and half and did a Blade kind of thing. But that's just my medical opinion.
Ooh, what if they did? Here's the thing, like we know that they're warm, like because we know when May and Caleb get back together after he's been transfused and she touches him, she's like, "Oh, you're warm." Like we assume that he's been, obviously cured, quote unquote, but does that mean it's completely gone?
Yeah, I mean, he is eating food, but maybe his tummy part turned human.
These are the questions we have.
Yeah. These are important questions.
We're smart guys. I'm proud of it.
Throwing some real science around. Well, I will say, although we never did get our Near Dark remake or a sequel, we almost did get a Near Dark remake. But of course, as we know, since this was the original Twilight, Twilight came along and sort of killed that. But I'm good with that.
Yeah, I think that this movie, it's a story that's been told 100 times. Like, there's a vampire and then there's a not a vampire and we have to kind of deal with that. But like the way it's told here is singular and unique and I don't think could be replicated. Like you could update it, but it's going to be a totally different story.
Yeah, I think. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Sorry. Even it just being in the late 80s gives it a certain feeling. And even when you look at things like Adam Greenberg's cinematography, where they're in the Winnebago, and I don't know how he did it, but it's stunning. They're not cheating it, but somehow like he's able to do these shots. It's like, well, how big is this Winnebago? It doesn't seem like you should have this much freedom of like angles and shots you should be able to do. And, and like you mentioned, I think it is a classic enough story with classic enough monster archetype that it would work, but there's so many ways to tell a story. Like why? I feel like this said pretty much everything it needed to say.
Yeah.
I'm really glad you mentioned Adam Greenberg's cinematography because that was on my list of things to talk about because it is absolutely gorgeous. And the thing is, like when you're doing movies where so much of it is dark, I almost made a vamp joke where I was like, is it dark or is it after dark? How do we know if it's after dark? That's one of my favorite bits from Vamp. But it's so interesting to me because it's so hard to do that kind of cinematography and still capture faces and images in a way that doesn't feel like you're losing them in the darkness. I don't even know if that makes sense. I'm so technically proficient when it comes to explaining these things, but it's a really hard thing to balance out in a camera. especially in 1987, especially shooting on film, and the way that Adam Greenberg does that here. There's so many moments where if you stop this movie and pause it, like it looks like art. It looks like you could print that out and put that on your wall. And again, I think when again, I love sort of the flamboyancy and the vivid, imagery in Lost Boys. And I sort of love the classic way that, things are framed in Fright Night. But like, there's just something really haunting about the way that this movie is shot. And I think it elevates, a lot of the story elements because it is, as you mentioned, a story we've seen so many times before. Boy meets girl and, things happen from there, except this time it's vampires. But I think the cinematography and also the Tangerine Dream score really puts this movie in like a completely different level.
When you see that credit at the start, you're like, thank you.
Like, how many scores do we owe to them? Like, oh my gosh.
So many. It's funny because every time I watch this movie, I kind of forget that they do the score until we get to the opening credits. And it's always just the happiest surprise that secretly I already knew. But I'm happy to see it again.
Yeah, it's like the movie saying, here, you get a dessert too.
I know it was interesting because like when I went back when I think it was Scream Factory who put out the Firestarter Blu-ray. And I hadn't watched it like probably since I was like a teenager. And again, I totally had forgotten that Tangerine Dream did their soundtrack score or whatever. Also. And I was like, oh, wow. I was like, I feel like I'm like getting a bonus here.
Now I need to rewatch Firestarter.
Yeah.
It's a little uneven, I think, as a movie. I still love it because I just adored it when I was a kid. But it's one of those where I'm like, oh man, that soundtrack really adds a lot. Do you guys? Because I know there's like the hubbub over the Legend score, because like there's Tangerine Dream version, and then there's, I think there's another version.
I think there's a Jerry Goldsmith version.
Yes,
it's Tangerine Dream for me all the way.
Okay.
There's only one way to view that movie, and it is with the falsetto singing and the dreamy tones and all of the blessed, amazing cheese. I love it.
I like the way that you just described that. That was like,
I know. Blessed, amazing cheese.
So in terms of, when you look, I mean, because obviously we're, it's hard not to compare, but when you look at vampire movies from the 80s, like does Near Dark pretty much rank really high for both of you then?
For me, it does. I think between this and Lost Boys, that's kind of the sweet spot. But I think that these two movies kind of represent both ends of the spectrum because I think I'm not trying to like delegitimate Lost Boys by saying this, but it's a much more fun movie. And it's got a little more humor to it. And this one is a lot more dangerous.
Yeah, this one ranks really highly for me. And I love Lost Boys and I love Vamp. It was just a great decade for vampire films.
It really was.
An embarrassment of riches for sure. But I'm also a big sucker for road movies. And that really spoke to me here. And there's just something where, in my opinion, Bigelow really excels at kind of restrained bombast. And Eric Red, with his scripts, is really good at keeping things tight and contained. And I feel like together it was a really cool meeting. And yeah, I've never felt the need to rank or put another movie above the other. And I think they're very different films as well. And I'm glad they both exist. But yeah, this one really gets under my skin in the best way.
Yeah, it's hard for me because Fright Night was like sort of like one of my go-to movies as a kid. Just because Charlie Brewster really resonated with me. Lost Boys to a degree too, because they both had like single moms kind of raising kids and, things happen and stuff like that. But I think Near Dark for me has come to mean a lot more as like an adult, because I just think that there's so much that you can really pull back, like in terms of the layers to it. So it's interesting because I worship Kathryn Bigelow, and it's one of those where I'm like, I saw Near Dark as a kid. I wish I would have appreciated it more back then. I just thought it was like this weird movie that the guy from Aliens was being a really scary dude. But it's interesting, like looking at the context of it versus all these other films that were happening at the time. It's a miracle it got made. And I know, again, they just wanted to do a Western and basically had to put genre elements in it to get the money. But I'm so glad that they did, because I think that they, between Kathryn and Eric, I think they did something really special. And I also, if we're talking about like her collaborations with Eric Red, I also want to give a shout out to Blue Steel, which I think doesn't get enough love from folks. So I rewatched that before Halloween 2018, and I was so glad I did, because it was so much better than I remembered.
Well, everything is, apparently.
It really,
that's the great thing about revisiting things. Like, you're being so hard on childhood you, but you were a kid. You're having fun watching a vampire movie, and it works on that level. It works on like a surface scary vampire movie level. And then when you get older and you can appreciate the performances and the nuance and the idea of creating your own family, it keeps working the older you get. And I think that's why so many people hold it so dearly, even though it didn't do well when it originally came out. But didn't they release it like a few weeks after The Lost Boy?
It was like, it might have been like 2 months after.
Oh,
yeah, because I think Lost Boys came out, I want to say August, and I think this came out in October.
My birthday, October 2nd.
Oh, it did. Look at that. It's like the birthday present you didn't even know you needed.
Nice.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those, like, I love the fact that it reviewed well, because it, it's not like critics were very kind to horror movies in the 80s. So when I was kind of digging through all the materials and stuff and looking at things, I was like, wow, actually, people got it back then. It just seemed like audiences didn't necessarily connect with it. But again, it was a really small movie, going through De Laurentiis. I don't know how well their distribution was back in 87. I mean, although that was like around the same time as like Maximum Overdrive and stuff. And that movie was everywhere.
Yeah, but I think it was one of the last movies they did before they folded. So
that could be
had
part
a
of it,
lot of things going against it, unfortunately.
But here we are, almost 33 years later, God. And it still holds up incredibly well.
Yeah, it's a favorite. It's a favorite among fans. I love seeing reactions on Twitter from people who are just discovering it for the first time. I think that it's one of those films that is continuing to live on and people will continue to embrace.
Yeah, it's a bummer that we don't have. It's not a movie that people can easily see if they haven't either, because I think I know the Blu-ray's been out of print for years with its Twilight-esque cover, which I own because, of course, I was going to get it because.
See, you were smarter than me. I threw a tantrum, refused to buy it, and said, I'm just going to wait until there's a better one.
But 10 years later.
A lot of people did that, and they're like, oh, no one wants Near Dark at all. I guess we won't put it on Blu-ray. Yes. Damn it.
This is my bad decision making, but I still have my DVD, which I will hold very closely.
Which is so pretty. It is streaming on the Criterion channel.
I was going to say I did. Yeah, I did see that it was actually streaming on Criterion because I almost had a panic attack because like the first time I went to watch it the other night, my disc started glitching and I was like, no. I was like, I don't have $80 to replace this Blu-ray, damn it. And I was like, okay, well, it is on Criterion if worse comes to worse. But yeah, I love that Karen Kusama is actually the reason it's over there. So thank you, Karen, for introducing people to Near Dark. So yeah, if you don't have it and you haven't seen it, go to Criterion. I mean, there's a million reasons to go and, to get the Criterion channel as it is. But for horror fans, I think being able to have access to Near Dark right now is probably a really good one. Amen. All right. Well, I think that's probably a good note to wrap on. So, Emily and Stephanie, thank you so much for joining me for this episode. I really appreciate it. You definitely did all the heavy lifting for me, so I appreciate it.
Oh, geez, you liar. But thank you, Heather. This has been fun. I love you both dearly.
Awesome.
Yes. Thank you both for tolerating me. You're the best.
Oh, Please. I was actually like, well, because with everything going on, I was like, oh, well, maybe I'll just have them record. you guys can do all the work, and I'll just be like, yeah, they did the episode this week. That's all people really need to listen to anyway. So, but no, thank you both so much for doing this and for talking about one of my favorites. And for those of you listening, you can check out all kinds of Corpse Club goodies over at corpseclub.com. For all your news, reviews, and interviews, you can head over to dailydead.com or find us over on Twitter at Daily Dead News. Thank you to my engineer, Brian. I call him my engineer because he is the engineer of my heart. I think this will be running on Valentine's Day, so it actually works out perfectly that we're celebrating a romantic vampire movie on Valentine's Day. But thank you to him for making me sound a little better than I normally sound. And yeah, for those of you who listen in every week, we really do appreciate you. And until next time, everybody, stay scary.